Namaste and welcome back to my latest video. I've written all of this down, so I will be reading off. Understanding the vibrational nature of ourselves is a precursor to the vibrational nature of thoughts, and so it is because of this that I have decided to go into the source self and source consciousness. But first, I'd like to ask, have you ever had one of those days when everything went perfectly well, and at the end of that day, you receive or experience that one thing that you've been thinking about for so long, and it just seemed to fall right into your lap with little to no effort? Well, we owe these great manifestations to our source selves, and today I hope to clarify exactly what the source self is, so that you can use that information to your advantage and replicate those results to your heart's content. So, what exactly is the source self, or source consciousness? The source self is also known by many names. It's also known as the higher self. Source consciousness is known as higher consciousness, and sometimes it is also known as Christ consciousness, though the term Christ consciousness has little relation to Christianity or Jesus Christ. But that is a whole other topic that I would be willing to go into should you have an interest in that. As I've said before in my two previous videos, our entire universe, well, as a matter of fact, everything ever in existence is the result of a frequency, vibration. It is our conscious minds that translate these vibrations within the quantum field, the physical plane. Our universe is comprised of trillions and trillions of differentiating frequencies. Some are of a high vibration and some are of a low vibration. Source consciousness, what many have called God, is a single consciousness. It is the fabric that permeates all reality, a cluster of energy that is in essence a duality, both male and female, but has nothing to do with the physical man or woman. It is the Alpha and the Omega, and actually it is because of this that many religious texts, when the Creator speaks, it's always in the plural. We are all expressions of this source consciousness. As you begin to understand this great secret and embody it, you'll begin to notice how institutionalized religion aims to suppress it. Living with the concept that God is an external force, like it's something outside yourself, it often leaves many of its followers with a sense of disconnection to divine energy or a sort of empty space in their hearts. God is not something outside yourself. We are instead eternal living expressions of source consciousness, God. So source consciousness is a cluster of energy, and it then extends parts of itself outward, much like a tree trunk with outstretched branches, and the branches are us. Source consciousness extends outward because it's for the sake of expansion. It's trying to understand what it is. It's trying to understand itself, and with every human expression, it gains perspective. As source consciousness expands, so does the rest of the universe, because it is in essence the infinite life force of the universe. So one could even say that consciousness is the programming language of the universe. Now, before you came into manifestation, the physical you, your source self sets an intention, simply for the sake of expansion. And let's just say that your source self wants to learn what love is. And what a better place to gain such expansion, to gain contrasting perspective, than from a physical reality that is filled with duality and polarized perspectives. And so, your source self, the non-physical you, sets the intention to feel love, and with this strong desire, source consciousness begins to collect all the necessary ingredients, like your star chart, your genes, the parents you will be born to, and the likely environment that will aid your original desire, which is love. Once your source self's intention reaches a maximum vibration, it then projects itself into physical dimension, which is now the physical you. So the sperm meets the egg, the cells become a fetus, fetus becomes baby, and baby comes into physical reality. I must note here that when your source self, the non physical you, projects forward into physical reality, it does not become the physical projection of itself. It simply gains another point of perspective. So you now have 2 points of perspective, which exist simultaneously. This is how your source self, the non physical eternal you, can gain expansion. It learns through the physical projection of itself. And every other conscious animal that exists in the quantum field, the physical realm, always has 2 points of perspective. One point of perspective is the source self, the non physical you. And the other point of perspective is the identity self, the physical you. And we can even go as far as calling this the ego portion of your source consciousness. So, your original intention for coming into physical perspective was to learn what love is. It is likely that your source self would deliberately choose to come into an environment that has a lack of love. For example, you may be born to a woman who never intended on having children, or perhaps a family that already has too many children, or maybe into a family where you were eventually adopted out. But regardless of the scenario, the source self would deliberately choose this kind of environment simply because you can only understand what love is through the absence of love. Meaning that the moment that you feel unloved, you are giving birth to the idea of what love would feel like or what it should feel like. I must also point out that the way that each one of us understands what love looks like, it's ever subjective and unique to our own experiences. We simply learn what we do want by knowing what we don't want. Much like how we learn what up is. We know what up is by knowing what down is, and we know what light is by knowing what darkness is. So we gain polarized perspectives through experience. So, how does your source self interpret your thoughts and desires and thus manifest them for you? So, the physical you has experienced the absence of love, and in result, you've given birth to the idea of what love should feel like. And then you begin to desire that love. Desire, which is also a thought, holds a very, very strong vibration. And this new idea, or thought, or desire is then sent out into the universe where your source self gains expansion from its physical point of perspective. It has now learned a new concept, and then it'll instantaneously adopt that new vibration, the desire to want love. So it stays in this strong vibration because your source self holds no resistance in nature. It has no concept of, I want this, but I can't have it, I can't have this. It simply adopts the new thought or desire's vibration, regardless of the nature of that vibration. So you, the physical self, and source self are a match to each other, simply because you are a physical projection of your source self. So there is always a magnetic umbilical cord connecting the two. Another analogy would be like the gravitational dance between the Earth and the Moon. You are a match to each other, but this does not mean that you are in alignment with each other. Now, like the Earth and the Moon, there's a gap, but there's still a magnetic connection between them. If we look at it, you'll see a gap, but there is a vibrational, magnetic connection between the Earth and the Moon. So if the gap is very, very small or non-existent, then you are in alignment with your source self. Now, if the gap is very large, then you are not in alignment with your source self. But I also have to note that the two are never severed, and as soon as they are severed, you would cease to exist in the physical form. The moment that you give rise to a desire, your source self gains expansion. It adopts that new vibration, and then it will begin to pull the physical aspect of itself, you, towards it in its direction. So as you begin to close the gap between you and your source self, the universe is collecting all the necessary ingredients so that it can then bring your desires into manifestation for you to experience them. So the moment that you line up with your source self, and the moment that you two share the same position and the same vibration, your desires come into manifestation. So this is where thoughts and emotions come into play. If you are thinking of a thought that feels good to you, if it feels joyful, then that is an indication that you are lining up with your source self. And after some time, you will then hold the same vibration as your source self, and then your desires begin to manifest. But if you're thinking of something that makes you feel sad and unhappy, if it doesn't feel good to you, then that is an indication that you are in resistance to your source self. You are in resistance to its vibration. And let's not forget that you were the one that, while in physical perspective, you were the one who gave rise to these desires and ideas. So as you focus more and more on negative thoughts, you are in essence pulling further and further away from your source self, your desires, quite frankly. You are in a sense turning your back on the non-physical aspect of yourself. As you get further away, your desires cannot manifest. As long as you and your source self are holding opposing vibrations, it will not manifest. But when you do line up with your source self and your desires do manifest, from that plateau, from that new perspective, the physical you will give rise to new desires. And then your source self will adopt that new vibration. It will move into position, and then you'll have to re-line up with it again. And this takes place over and over and over again throughout life, several lives. This is how your source self can gain perspective. It gains expansion. It is important to note that our negative thoughts focused on long enough, they still manifest, but it is not a result of your source self. They manifest because we are continuously matching up with other negative vibrations which are already outside ourselves, other people's negative vibrations. And so we line up with that because they are a match to ourselves. So the goal here is to gain expansion. You gain perspective. And we must continuously line up with our source selves in order to manifest our desires and thus gain perspective and create new desires. We line up with ourselves by continuously following the feelings and thoughts that bring us joy and love, and continuously matching the same vibration as our source selves. And remember, this is the entire reason why you came into physical manifestation in the first place. Now, I'd like to also mention that our source selves are responsible for intuition, psychic abilities, and all other forms of ESP. But that's a whole topic that I would love to go into at a later time. Many psychics and clairvoyants, um, a lot of them a lot of people would want to say that they're gifted. Now, everyone has this ability. They are simply in alignment with their source selves, which is why they're so very sensitive to all the vibrations that are around them. Now, because our emotions and thoughts play a large role in our reality, and negative thoughts seem to be unwelcome now that we know this about reality, it does not mean that you should gloss over or simply ignore every negative thought that you have. Doing so is resistance. And as a very gifted psychic once said, anything we resist persists. Much love.